Have you ever noticed how many incredible thinkers there are in the history of philosophy? People whose ideas are still influencing us today.
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking about one of those people right now, Bernard Bolzano.
Interesting guy.
Maybe not a household name, but he had some seriously sharp ideas about logic,
Right.
and his thinking is still relevant today.
Definitely still relevant.
So, we're taking a deep dive into his work with help from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Makes sense. It's a good source.
It's a great guide, really helps to understand what made this guy tick.
Yeah, and it's not just a surface level thing.
Right.
We're going for a deep understanding here.
Absolutely.
We want to uncover the real lasting value of Bolzano's ideas.
Totally, and avoid getting too bogged down in the introductory stuff.
Yeah, the basics.
We're assuming our listeners are already familiar with some of the bigger philosophical ideas.
So think of this as a focused exploration
Right.
into the mind of a truly original thinker.
Exactly.
Someone who really made a mark.
And he lived at a pretty key moment in philosophical history, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Bernard Bolzano, he was a Catholic priest, a professor,
Right.
and a seriously talented mathematician.
Yeah.
But he was also super important for the way logic developed, how we understand it today.
A bridge between different eras of thought.
Totally. He was active, I think, between 1781 and 1848, somewhere there.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
That puts him between Leibniz and Frege
Yeah.
in terms of his work in logic.
Linking those two giants.
Exactly. And the range of things he was interested in.
Oh, it's huge.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
He did so much.
Yeah.
So today, we really want to dig into the core of his thinking.
Right.
The stuff that's going to be most useful for people who are already interested in philosophy.
The real meat of it.
Exactly.
What makes him stand out?
Right. So let's start with the scope of his work,
Yeah, good place to start.
What did he actually get into?
Okay, so what's really fascinating about Bolzano is that he was so versatile.
Really versatile.
He reminds me of those Renaissance guys, a true polymath.
A true Renaissance man.
And we all know about his logic and math.
Right, that's his main thing, right.
That's what he's famous for.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to him. He had important things to say about theology, ethics,
Right.
aesthetics, political philosophy, philosophy of religion,
Wow.
metaphysics, the philosophy of nature,
He really covered a lot of ground.
even metaphilosophy, thinking about thinking itself.
That's pretty incredible, right?
Is a real testament to his time.
Yeah.
Back then, the lines between these fields were kind of blurry.
Yeah, they were less defined back then.
So you could be an expert in a lot of different areas.
It makes you think about how much we specialize now.
We do, don't we?
It's hard to imagine someone making real contributions across so many disciplines today.
You're absolutely right.
And he wasn't just some ivory tower philosopher either.
No, not at all.
He actually cared about people.
He did. He was known for being very philanthropic.
Oh, that's interesting.
His ethical and political views weren't just theories.
Right.
He actively supported those who were struggling.
He did.
The poor, those facing injustice.
Like marginalized groups.
Yeah, he was a real advocate. He even worked with friends and students to set up programs.
Really? What kind of programs?
Things like poorhouses, schools, loan programs for working class folks.
That's amazing.
It's a cool example of how his theories connected with real life.
Totally. A real hands-on philosopher.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's dive into the area where he had the biggest impact.
All right, where would that be?
His work on logic and what he called the theory of science.
Right.
But when he said logic, he wasn't just talking about what we usually think of today.
Oh, he meant something much broader.
Like formal logic.
Yeah.
So what did he have in mind?
Okay, so for Bolzano, logic, or theory of science, as he often called it,
Okay.
it was all about integrating formal logic with epistemology and philosophy of science.
Oh, wow. That's a lot to put together.
It was a comprehensive framework for understanding how we think rationally.
So he wasn't just trying to figure out the rules of valid arguments.
No.
He wanted to understand the whole structure of knowledge itself.
Exactly.
That's ambitious.
Oh, it was. His goal was to come up with principles for organizing all truth into different sciences.
All truth.
Yep, and figuring out the best way to present them
Okay.
in a clear and efficient manner, or what he called an expedient fashion.
Expedient fashion. I like that.
It sounds kind of like, just organizing science.
Yeah.
But for Bolzano, It was a serious philosophical problem
It was.
that needed rigorous thinking.
I can see that.
And it wasn't just one big idea. It had a lot of different parts,
It did.
all connected, of course.
Okay.
So he had the theory of foundations,
Okay.
which was all about, the fundamental elements and principles.
Basics.
Yeah. And then there was the theory of elements.
Okay.
That focused on the building blocks of thought.
The basic building blocks. Got it.
Then you have epistemology, or the theory of knowledge.
Right? How we know things.
Exactly. Then there's heuristics.
Heuristics? What's that?
That's the art of discovery, how we find new knowledge.
Oh, interesting.
And finally, there's the theory of science itself.
Okay.
That's about how we organize and present all this knowledge systematically.
Makes sense.
So as you can see, this was a really big project.
It was a huge undertaking.
It was.
It wasn't just like a basic logic course.
No, much more than that.
Now, I read that he even tried to prove that truth exists
He did.
logically.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty bold move, right?
It's a classic philosophical question.
Can you even prove something like that?
Well, he gave it a shot.
He did.
He used what's called a reductio ad absurdum argument,
Okay.
combined with mathematical induction.
Mathematical induction. Okay.
And the interesting thing, from a philosophical point of view, is that he specifically included the premise that the sense of a proposition is itself a proposition.
The sense of a proposition is a proposition.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, he argued that if there were no true propositions,
Okay.
then the proposition, there is no true proposition,
Right.
would itself be a proposition,
It would.
but it would be false.
Because it's saying that there are no true propositions, and it itself is a proposition.
Exactly, which creates a contradiction.
Got it.
It's a classic self-referential paradox.
But the source we're looking at, it raises a question
It does.
about whether this proof actually shows that truths in themselves exist.
You mean his objective proposition?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's a great point to think about.
Because even if his argument works,
Right.
it might only prove that true judgments exist,
Right.
or true sentences,
Which are linguistic things.
not those mind-independent propositions he was trying to prove.
That's the key distinction.
So are you saying his proof maybe assumes the thing it's trying to prove?
It's possible. The source argues that the premise about the sense of a proposition,
Okay.
that premise might already assume that objective propositions exist.
That's circular reasoning, isn't it?
Right. It might be a petitio principii.
Begging the question.
Exactly.
So even though he was trying to be really rigorous,
And he was.
it's not clear if his proof really worked.
Not definitively. It's still a matter of debate.
Okay, so let's move on to how he thought about propositions and ideas.
Right.
He had this idea of a third realm, which is a bit out there, right?
It's a bit unique.
So can you unpack that for us?
Okay, so the core of Bolzano's philosophy is the idea that propositions and ideas are objective.
Objective.
They're not just in our heads.
Right, they're not subjective.
And he said they belong to this third realm,
This third realm.
which is separate from both the physical world and the world of our minds.
So neither physical nor mental.
Right. And it exists on its own,
Yeah.
independent of us thinking about it.
Okay, but then he gets into some tricky terminology.
He does, doesn't he?
That's caused a lot of discussion. Because he said these propositions and ideas are,
He did.
but they don't exist.
Right.
And they don't have being.
He used those last two terms, exist and being, to mean the same thing as reality.
Reality.
Which for him meant something that's efficacious, something that has causal power.
So to be real, you have to be able to cause things.
Yeah, that was his idea.
And these propositions, they're not causing anything.
Not in that sense, no.
They're kind of floating out there in this third realm.
In a way, yeah.
It's a bit like Plato's theory of forms.
There are definitely some parallels.
But Bolzano had his own way of thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely.
So what was he trying to get at with this whole third realm idea?
Well, he was really pushing back against psychologism.
Psychologism.
That's the idea that logic is just a part of psychology. Bolzano thought logic was way more fundamental than that.
So he created this third realm.
To give propositions and ideas a solid foundation.
The foundation that doesn't depend on our minds.
Exactly. He wanted to show that logic was a real science.
Not just something we make up.
Right.
And it's interesting because the source points out that even other philosophers who've talked about third realms
Right.
haven't been able to explain them much more clearly.
It's a tough concept.
It's a perennial problem in philosophy.
It is.
Figuring out what these abstract objects really are.
Yeah, where do they fit in?
Even thinkers like Husserl,
Right, Husserl.
Popper, and Frege,
Big names.
they haven't fully solved the problem either.
No, but Bolzano's ideas were really productive for his logic,
They were, weren't they?
even if the third realm is a bit fuzzy.
Okay, so let's talk about how he analyzed the structure of these propositions and ideas.
All right, let's get into that.
He seemed to have a very specific grammar in mind.
He did. He had a very clear model.
What was it?
He believed that all propositions, no matter how they look in language,
Okay.
have a basic subject-predicate structure,
Subject predicate.
like
Okay.
A has B,
A has B, okay.
where A is the subject idea, B is the predicate idea, and has is the copula.
The copula.
Yeah, he liked has better than forms of to be.
Why was that?
He thought it was more accurate for showing how we attribute properties or relations.
Okay.
Like, instead of saying Socrates is wise,
Socrates is wise.
the real logical form is Socrates has wisdom.
Socrates has wisdom. Okay, I see.
And this consistent structure was really important for his whole approach to logic.
So that's how he decided if two propositions were identical,
Exactly.
if they had the same structure.
Right. So you have two propositions.
Okay.
A1 has B1 and A2 has B2.
Okay, A1 has B1 and A2 has B2.
They're identical only if their subject ideas are the same.
So A1 and A2 have to be identical.
Yep. And their predicate ideas have to be identical too.
B1 and B2.
Right. This was crucial for how he understood logical relationships and consequences.
Now, I notice he makes a distinction between a proposition just being and a proposition being true.
He does, and it's an important one.
What's the difference?
So for a proposition A has B to simply be a proposition,
Okay.
the predicate idea B just needs to act like it's an idea of an attribute.
Like it's pretending to be an attribute.
Yeah, exactly. But for that proposition to be true,
Okay.
the predicate idea B has to actually be an idea of a real attribute.
Okay, so it has to correspond to something real.
Right.
Either a property or a relation.
And that attribute has to belong to the object of the subject idea A.
So it's not enough for the proposition to be grammatically correct.
No, it has to actually reflect reality.
Give me an example.
Sure, how about
Yeah.
this? The present king of France is bald.
Okay, the present king of France is bald.
That's a perfectly fine proposition for Bolzano.
Right.
It is.
It exists grammatically.
Exactly.
But is it true?
But it's not true, because there's no king of France right now.
Right, there isn't. Okay, that makes sense. So a proposition can be well-formed
Right.
and exist in this third realm,
Exactly.
but still not be true.
Yep.
What about the subject idea itself?
The subject idea.
The source mentions some tricky stuff with singular versus general ideas.
Oh, right.
What's that about?
Yeah, so Bolzano recognized that the subject idea A could be singular.
Meaning it refers to one specific thing?
Right.
Okay.
Like God or the sun.
Okay, those are singular.
Or it could be general,
General meaning,
referring to a whole class of things.
okay, like man or animal.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And when the subject idea is general,
Okay.
Bolzano said the proposition A has B means the same as every A has B.
Or all A have B.
Right. So, for example, the proposition animals have sensitivity
Okay.
is logically the same as every animal has sensitivity.
Lisa.
He was really thinking ahead with this, moving towards quantifiers.
He was way ahead of his time.
He was.
Now, he also brings up symbolic ideas.
Symbolic ideas, yeah.
These are ideas about other ideas, right?
That's right.
How do those fit into his system?
Okay, so symbolic ideas are important for propositions where the subject or predicate is about thinking itself.
Thinking about thinking.
Yeah, so it's like an idea of an idea.
Okay, I'm following.
He used them a lot to try to show that all propositions could fit into his A has B form.
Even propositions about beliefs or judgments.
Exactly, even those.
But it sounds like he didn't completely nail it down.
He didn't quite have the right tools, according to the source.
Right.
He didn't have anything like Frege's function argument scheme.
Okay.
But it shows he was really committed to his subject-predicate analysis.
He was.
And he understood how tricky intentionality can be.
Now, one of the biggest questions about propositions is their truth value.
Yeah. Are they true or false?
And Bolzano had a strong opinion on this.
He did.
He thought they were timelessly true or false.
That's right, unchanging.
But things change all the time, right?
They do.
So how did he deal with that apparent change in truth values?
So Bolzano argued that propositions themselves have a fixed truth value.
Okay.
They're either always true or always false.
Okay.
The reason we see truth values changing
Right.
is because we're often not talking about a single, well-defined proposition.
I see.
We might be using ambiguous language,
Okay.
which could represent different propositions.
Got it.
Some true, some false.
Right.
Or we might be thinking about propositional forms.
Propositional forms, what are those?
They're like templates for propositions.
Yep.
They have variables.
Variables.
Like, think about the sentence, "It is raining."
It is raining. Okay.
For Bolzano, that's not a complete proposition.
It's not.
It's missing information.
What's it missing?
Like, when and where is it raining?
Okay.
It needs those details to be a real proposition.
So it's a propositional form
Yeah.
until you fill in those variables?
Right, maybe using indexicals like here and now?
It's raining here now.
Exactly.
That's a complete proposition.
That's a proposition.
And for Bolzano, once those variables are filled in,
Right.
the proposition has a truth value that never changes.
That's his key point.
So the fully specified proposition has a fixed truth value,
It does.
even though the sentence we use to express it might seem to change truth value over time.
Exactly.
That's a subtle distinction.
It is.
Okay, so what's his criterion for truth then?
He's got a correspondence theory, right?
Yeah, but it sounds like he added a twist.
Oh, he did.
What was his take on it?
So he said a proposition A has B is true.
Okay.
If and only if A actually has B.
Okay, that's the basic correspondence theory.
Right, but here's the catch.
The catch.
The subject idea, A, has to be non-empty.
Non-empty meaning...
It has to refer to something that actually exists.
Oh, I see.
It can't just be an empty concept.
So a proposition can only be true if it's about something real.
That was his view. So his full definition is, A has B is true if and only if A has B, and the idea A has at least one object.
So two conditions for truth.
Two conditions.
The predicate has to be true of the subject, and the subject has to actually exist.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about the ideas themselves.
Okay.
The building blocks of propositions.
Right.
It seems like Bolzano prioritizes propositions in his analysis.
He does. He sort of flips the script.
How so?
Instead of saying that propositions are built from ideas,
Right.
he defines ideas as parts of propositions that aren't themselves propositions.
Oh, I see. So propositions come first, in a way.
They do in his framework.
And that's similar to what later thinkers like Frege and Wittgenstein did.
Yeah, it's an interesting foreshadowing of their ideas.
It is. And this leads to a clear difference between propositions and ideas.
Right.
Propositions can be true or false,
Right.
but ideas can't.
They can't.
Now, he also talked about the internal and external dimensions of ideas.
He did.
What are those about?
Okay, so the internal dimension of an idea
Okay.
is all about its structure.
Its structure.
Is it simple or complex?
Okay.
If it's complex, what are its parts?
Right.
He called the set of all parts of an idea its content.
Its content.
And here's something interesting.
Yeah.
He said that two complex ideas could have the same content,
Okay.
but still be different
How?
if the parts are arranged differently.
Oh, interesting.
He has this great example.
What is it?
He talks about an erudite son of an unerudite father.
Okay, an erudite son of an unerudite father.
Okay, an erudite son of an unerudite father.
Versus an unerudite son of an erudite father.
An unerudite son of an erudite father.
Same content?
Same content, different
No,
arrangement.
so the order matters.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about the external dimension?
The external dimension is about how the idea relates to the objects it represents.
Okay.
Does it have no objects?
No object.
That would be an empty idea.
Okay.
Or does it have a single object?
A singular idea.
Right. Or multiple objects.
A general idea.
Okay, so it's about how many objects the idea refers to.
Exactly.
What are some of the simple ideas he talks about?
He gives examples like something has,
Something has.
which is the copula itself,
Okay.
viewed as an idea, non, which is negation,
Okay.
reality, which is Wirklichkeit in German,
Wirklichkeit, okay.
and ought, which is Sollen.
Solon, okay. Those are pretty fundamental concepts.
They are.
And he thought all complex ideas were built from these simple ones.
Right, but he didn't really lay out all the rules for how they combine.
That's interesting.
It's an area that needs more exploration, I think.
And then there are empty ideas.
Empty ideas and contradictory ideas.
How did he distinguish between those?
So an empty idea, for Bolzano,
Okay.
it's an idea that just doesn't have any objects.
It doesn't refer to anything.
Right, like nothing.
Nothing.
Golden Mountain or winged horse.
So that those ideas exist, but they're empty.
Yeah, he insisted that they exist in his third realm.
They do. Okay.
But they're empty.
What about contradictory ideas?
Contradictory ideas, or imaginary ideas as he sometimes called them,
Okay.
are a special kind of empty idea.
Okay.
These are ideas that can't have any objects.
Because they're self-contradictory.
Exactly.
Like what?
Think of a round square.
A round square.
Or a triangle that is quadrangular.
Okay.
Those are logically impossible.
Right.
So the key difference is this.
Okay.
Empty ideas just happen to lack objects.
Right.
It's possible they could have objects in a different world, maybe,
Right.
but contradictory ideas can never have objects.
They're inherently impossible.
Exactly. That's how we distinguish them.
Now, he also talks about the relation R between ideas and their objects.
Right. And the concept of extension.
How do those fit into his system?
Okay, so the relation R is the basic connection between an idea and its objects.
Okay.
When you have IRX,
IRS.
it means I is an idea of X.
For X is an object of I.
Exactly. And the extension of an idea is all the objects that fall under that idea.
All the things it refers to.
Right. We can think of it as a set.
A set, okay.
Even empty ideas have extensions.
They do?
Their extension is just the empty set.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
So he's using the modern concept of a set to talk about this.
And these extensions are important for understanding how ideas relate to each other.
Exactly.
He uses them to define things like compatibility and inclusion, right?
Yes, he does.
So how do those work?
Two ideas are compatible if their extensions overlap.
If they share at least one object.
Right. If they have something in common.
Okay.
And an idea, I1, is included in I2.
Okay.
If they're compatible.
Okay.
And every object of I1 is also an object of I2.
So the extension of I1 is a subset of the extension of I2.
Right. That's inclusion for Bolzano.
And these definitions are important for his account of logical entailment.
Absolutely.
How different concepts relate to each other.